He never expected his morning to begin with fear, real, paralyzing fear that froze him before he could even breathe. As a black, single dad who fought every day just to be taken seriously, he thought he had seen enough judgment, enough whispers, enough doors quietly shut in his face. But nothing compared to the moment he opened his eyes and saw the powerful female CEO, one of the most respected women in the city, wearing his shirt and standing at the foot of his bed, her hands trembling as if she carried a truth too heavy to speak. And when she finally did, everything he believed about his life, his worth, and the world around him shifted in an instant. For years, he had learned to live quietly on the edges of a world that rarely gave men like him a fair chance. As a black single dad, every morning began long before the sun, packing lunches, checking homework, whispering encouragement into the small moments before school. His life was built on responsibility, discipline, and the constant awareness that one mistake could be used against him. His apartment was modest but warm, filled with the little drawings his son made and the soft reminders of a life built from struggle, sacrifice, and love. He worked 2 jobs, one that paid the bills and one that kept hope alive. Every day he reminded himself that he had to be stronger, calmer, better, because society judged him long before they learned his name. The night before had been nothing extraordinary. He remembered coming home exhausted, collapsing on the couch, and drifting into sleep while thinking about unpaid bills and school forms he needed to sign. There had been no party, no celebration, no chaos to explain what he was about to wake up to. So when he opened his eyes that morning and saw her, the woman known for her power, elegance, and influence, standing in his small, humble room wearing his oversized shirt, it felt like the universe had made a mistake. She didn't belong in his world. Not in that room, not in that shirt, not with that expression of fear and urgency. And yet there she was. Her eyes weren't filled with arrogance or superiority. They held something else entirely, something fragile, shaken, and deeply human. As he struggled to piece together what could have happened, a quiet, unsettling question formed in the back of his mind. Why would a woman with everything to lose come to him with a truth she could barely carry? He rose slowly, every muscle tight with confusion, as if moving too quickly would shatter the delicate silence that held the room together. The CEO stood completely still, her shoulders pulled inward, her gaze avoiding his, like someone who had stepped into a world she'd only ever observed from far above. He had seen her before, though only from a distance. Billboards, interviews, articles praising her brilliance and leadership. She was a symbol of corporate power, wealth, and privilege, everything he had never been allowed near. Not someone who would ever share the same space as a man constantly underestimated because of his skin color, his single parenthood, and his quiet, unseen struggles. But now she stood in his small, humble room, wrapped in his shirt, breathing as though she had run for miles. And as he watched her, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that whatever truth she carried was bigger than the situation, bigger than them both. She finally lifted her gaze, and he noticed the exhaustion behind her polished exterior, dark circles under her eyes, trembling lips, and a weight pressing down on her that even her success couldn't shield her from. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. And it had everything to do with him. As she tried to steady herself, he felt a cold unease settle in his chest. He remembered the stories, how people like him were often blamed before they were understood, how assumptions could destroy lives overnight. One wrong headline, one false accusation, one misunderstood moment, and everything he built for his son could crumble. He scanned the room quickly. Nothing was displaced. Nothing suggested chaos. Nothing explained why she was here. Then he noticed it, a faint bruise on her wrist, barely visible beneath the fabric, a mark too small to catch most eyes, but clear enough to tell a story of its own. His heart tightened. She wasn't just frightened. She was hiding. The CEO swallowed hard, trying to find words, but her voice failed her. She pressed a hand to the doorway for balance, as if she feared her own truth. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, and he could sense that she was fighting 1,000 thoughts at once. And behind all of it was a reality they both knew too well. Her presence in his apartment, dressed like that, could be twisted, intentionally or not, into a narrative that painted him as a threat, a predator, an easy target. He had lived long enough to know stories didn't need to be true to ruin a black man's life. They just needed to be told. But she didn't look at him with fear. She looked at him with desperation, and a type of guilt that suggested she knew the danger she had brought to his doorstep. The tension grew thicker with every passing second. His mind raced with questions he was too afraid to ask. Who hurt her? Why was she here? Why him? What did she need from a man society treated as disposable? Her breath shook as she finally prepared to speak, and he sensed that whatever came next would not just explain her presence, it would unravel everything he thought he understood about the lines that divided their worlds. She steadied herself against the wall, eyes glistening as if she were fighting a truth she had kept buried for too long. And when she finally forced herself to look at him, really look at him, the polished CEO vanished. What stood before him now was a woman stripped of power, trembling beneath the weight of a secret that had chased her across the night. Her voice came out uneven, barely more than a whisper held together by fear and regret. She didn't confess in a single sweeping moment. It unfolded in trembling layers, each one cutting deeper than the last. She told him that she had been targeted, followed by men from her own company, people who didn't want her in charge, people who had spent years hiding their prejudice behind polite smiles and boardroom compliments. They didn't just want her removed, they wanted to destroy her. And when she tried to expose their racism, their corruption, their quiet siphoning of funds hidden behind her name, they threatened her. Her home no longer felt safe, her office was compromised, every plan she tried to make, they dismantled. They had influence, resources, and powerful friends, but she had one thing left, the truth. A truth so incriminating that if it reached the public, it would ruin the men who built their careers on discrimination, silence, and fear. She had spent the night running, literally running from the people who were supposed to protect her. When she saw him outside the late-night store, exhausted and half asleep while grabbing snacks for his son's lunch, she recognized him instantly. She remembered his job at the company, the times he had been ignored, overlooked, dismissed. She remembered the quiet dignity he carried in a place that treated him like he didn't belong. And she made a choice, a risky one, a desperate one. She followed him home because he was the only person she trusted not to twist the truth, and the only man whose integrity terrified the corrupt executives more than her testimony did. As she finished speaking, her voice broke completely. The weight of her confession filled the room, pressing down on him like a tidal wave. Nothing about her presence was accidental. Nothing about this moment was coincidence. She had come to him because the fight she carried was bigger than either of them. And now, without warning, he had become part of it. He sat silently, the words echoing in his mind long after she had fallen quiet. Every detail of her confession, the threats, the hidden prejudice, the danger she had faced felt heavy, almost unbearable. But instead of fear, he felt something else rising, a strange clarity, a sense of purpose he hadn't known in months. For so long, his life had been shaped by the quiet walls of limitation, doors that never opened, opportunities that never came, and the constant weight of assumptions based on the color of his skin. But here was someone from the other side of every privilege he had ever lacked, seeking refuge and truth in him. It was a reversal of expectations, a moment that forced him to see the power in his own resilience and integrity. He realized that the world often tries to define people by narrow roles, single dad, outsider, powerless. But life has a way of flipping those definitions when you least expect it. Trust, courage, and honesty can become the greatest weapons against injustice. In that small, quiet apartment, with sunlight spilling across the floor, he understood that real strength isn't measured by wealth, title, or status. It's measured by the choices we make when the world expects us to stay silent. The female CEO left with a promise of accountability, a sense of safety, and a newfound respect for the man who had silently carried his own battles while facing the world. And as he watched her go, he knew that his life, his son's future, and even the system that tried to keep him down had shifted in subtle but powerful ways. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change the course of many lives. Sometimes the people who seem least powerful are the ones who carry the heaviest influence. And he asked himself, quietly but firmly, who decides who is worthy of being heard, And who decides when it's finally time to speak the truth? In the end, the morning that began with fear became the catalyst for recognition, justice, and hope. A reminder that courage can appear in the most unexpected places, and that even in a world riddled with bias, one act of integrity can ripple farther than anyone ever imagines.